Hi, everyone. My name is Eva Tucker, and I am part of the rare disease community as a mother to my 8-year-old son, William, who has a 5q31.3 to 5q32 microdeletion. And I'm excited to be here with you all today. Welcome to At the Edge of Hope, a film about rare disease and the heroes going to the ends of the earth to create hope where none existed. We are so pleased to have Laura King Edwards and Dan Salvo with us today to talk about the film, why they made it, and the impact the film and Lori's book, Run to the Light, have had on so many. Laura King Edwards is a writer, runner, and passionate rare disease advocate. In her early 20s, Edwards co-founded Taylor's Tale, a small public charity that quickly became a global force in the fight against CLN1 disease. Today, she serves as the organization's vice president. An accomplished runner, Edwards has completed more than 30 half marathons and raced in almost half of the 50 states to honor her late sister. She has also run 2 half marathons blindfolded, delivered a TEDx talk, and published a book, Run to the Light. She pens a monthly column for Batten Disease News, and her work has been featured in many online publications, as well as magazines, newspapers, and literary journals. Edwards is a former Global Genes Rare Champion of Hope nominee. Dan Salvo created DP Studios Productions, an award-winning photography, film production, and live streaming company. Over the past 15 years, he has captured millions of photographs, created hundreds of films, and consulted for dozens of businesses from around the world to develop their creative vision, brand identity, and content and communication strategy. Dan brings an innate ability to navigate within delicate and nuanced spaces, an invaluable mandate when working in the rare disease space. This capacity for capturing and communicating arcs of emotion is preeminent in his 2 documentary films, The Weight of a Mountain and At the Edge of Hope. These films require hundreds of hours of filming and editing, as well as an indelible trust of those featured. In return, these powerful projects provided viewers with an intimate glimpse into the world of rare disease, gene therapy, and the resilience of the human spirit. Laura and Dan will join us in conversation after the film. So the film's about 31 minutes long, or 35 minutes long. I'm going to play that now, and then we're excited to talk more with Laura and Dan. And if you have any questions, you can go ahead and enter them through the Q&A box as we go.
Immersion is daunting. Taking the next step means you have to be all in. The course has changed so drastically from what it was even moments before. Your imagined future decays into mere ashes in the wind. The air becomes thin, and your whole being feels deprived of something it so desperately needs. Shedding the old version of yourself is the prerequisite for this new mission. It's when answering the call means diving into a future cloaked and shrouded in uncertainty. The call to step into the role that we were created for. You look at the ominous future ahead and wonder, do I have it in me?
It was a really frigid, cold December morning. And I will never forget one of the most amazing moments of my life, watching my blind 10-year-old sister who was fighting this terrible, fatal brain disease, crossing the finish line. And I knew from that moment forward that I would always run for her. I just knew this is something I have to do for her. And it was something that it didn't even come to light in my brain. It was something deeper and more primal. It was just, I have to run for my sister. We've been fighting Batten disease for a long time. Taylor was diagnosed with Batten disease 12 years ago. Chronic disease is something that you really can't understand until you live it. It wears you down. It doesn't matter how strong you are. It doesn't matter how much passion you have. It doesn't matter how many tools and resources you have to fight it. We're all human beings at the end of the day. And something like Batten disease over years and years, and the idea of just watching somebody you love systematically lose everything that made them who they were is tough. It's tougher than anything I could have ever imagined before I actually had to live it as a sister.
I have two children with Sanfilippo syndrome, Ryan, who's 13, and Braden, who's 10. We're probably closer to the third stage of the disease, especially with Ryan, where he needs to be fed at this point. I mean, he can't eat on his own. He can't walk on his own. He lost speech, so it's very difficult. I have to bathe both boys. It's a long day. It's 24/7 care, making sure they're getting the right nutrition, making sure they get the right exercise. And some nights later in the disease where Ryan's at, they have trouble sleeping. So there's times where nights are sleepless. We'll go through the whole night without sleeping, or Ryan will have difficulty sleeping, and I'll have to go to work the next day.
You're not made to bury your own kids. Once you find out that he's gonna live about a year, then that whole year is just spent wound care, nutrition, getting information, and just trying to make him as comfortable as possible in that time that he has, knowing that he's not gonna be 2, that he's not gonna be 3. That's what you got, is that year.
I think it was one of the hardest things I've had to do for my daughter, because the day of the surgery, I know how afraid she was. She actually said to me she wanted to leave. She didn't want to have it done. The surgery was a success, absolutely. It was a success because she sits up straight now and her back is completely straight, but she doesn't walk from it. It was a very, very hard time in her life and my life, and family-wise, it was a very difficult time.
My husband and I often talk about Taylor's quality of life. We'll come and spend an evening at my parents' house and have dinner, and we're all laughing and enjoying each other's company, and then we'll be driving home and say, Taylor doesn't get to be part of those basic, simple, beautiful human interactions the way we do, because Batten disease has stolen everything from her.
In their minds, they know what they want to do. They want to communicate with you and say, hey, Daddy, this hurts, or I don't feel good, but they can't tell you that. Their brain doesn't allow, those signals to connect, and they get very frustrated. And it's difficult to see your child go through that.
Today, she can't see, she can't talk, she can't swallow food, she can't walk, she can't communicate. I think she's often in pain.
We were asked to come in for a consultation with a geneticist, and he told us that Taylor had Batten, that there was nothing that could be done, that it was a fatal disease, there was no treatment, and that we needed to take her home and make happy memories. That's a quote. We were given a stack of papers that had been copied from the internet about Batten disease, given a broad picture of what would happen to her, and sent on our way. After the diagnosis, your head tells you, live each day as happy and as fully as you can, but your heart tells you, I'm so afraid. all of a sudden there's a sense of waiting in your life. You're waiting for the next step. What's the monster going to do? What's it going to do to her? What's it going to do to us?
When you start out, you're not sure you can save your children. When we started out, my children were diagnosed in 2009. There was nothing. We had nothing at all. We had no hope. We went into a geneticist's office and they told us, your children are gonna die. Their average age is gonna be 12 to 15. Here's what's gonna happen, and there's really nothing you can do about that.
Sanfilippo syndrome particularly has an effect on the central nervous system, the brain and spinal cord. So what happens is they don't gain the same skills that other children do. And then soon after that becomes obvious, they start to lose some of the skills they have. So language function starts to deteriorate, often by the age of 4 to 5 years old. Over time, then there's a decline in motor function as well. So it's really a devastating disease for parents to face right as they get to know their child. Their behaviors, many of their personality and cognitive traits change over time.
When you're dealt a diagnosis like this, it just feels like everything caves in on you. There's such a rush of emotion and thoughts, and you're surrounded with all these unknowns. You're surrounded with darkness.
In rare disease, patients and parents are thrown into this, and they're basically given a pamphlet or maybe sent home saying, go love your child, because we don't really know what's going on. There isn't a roadmap when you get thrown into this world of rare disease.
You're dealing with new information while at the same time trying to figure out how you have to let go of the things that you really had seen and believed were coming in this child's future. And just that devastating dichotomy of giving up and taking on all at the same time and still trying to keep your family afloat, keep your family going.
The legs that took her to the finish line of 2 5Ks no longer work for her. The voice that used to serenade us from the hearth in our family room can no longer even whisper. I remember the day she was fasting in the hospital because she was going to have a feeding tube placed. And she turned to us and said, "I'm hungry." And those are the last words that she ever said.
My son Drakey was born with no skin on his fingertips. Everything leading up to that point was a total normal pregnancy. The initial sign of something was not right was the doctor saying, "I have never seen that before." EB is a genetic skin disease. Proteins and collagen, it's missing, so it makes the integrity of your skin a lot weaker. So it's more prone to trauma with touch, heat, scratch. Generally, there's a lot of bandage changing, always wound care, always trying to protect for infections. Some of these kids need to be changed 3 or 4 times a day. That's 90 minutes every changing. And some of it's just so painful for the child that it's just a horrific daily life for not only the child, but the family that's involved with that. Once you research EB on your own and you see the pictures of it and you read a little about it, then you figure out some kids die from EB.
We were blessed with twins, Gabby and Joey. And being that they were twins and we could compare them, Joseph was able to hold up his head. Gabby was like a rag doll. She couldn't hold her head up, her legs, her arms were very, very weak. When she had a muscle biopsy done, they found out that she had myofibrillar myopathy.
Myofibrillar myopathy in adults, it's more common around the age of 50 or 55. But in children, at the time that I was diagnosed, there was only 3 recorded cases of it in the world.
It's a muscular disease that affects every muscle in the body. Every muscle is is very, very weak. Her brain is intact. That's the one muscle that's not affected. What it takes for us to sit in a chair, it takes 14 times the work for her to sit in that chair. She does get up sometimes with tears. She's crying because of the pain. Even with all that being said, that how difficult it was, she got through it. She pulled it together somehow and she got herself through it. You always have to have that hope, and you keep positive and you think positive, because that's the only thing that's going to get you to the next step.
I'm fearful of the known, I'm fearful of the unknown, and I couldn't live that way forever, for as long as Batten disease is a part of your life. So pretty soon we decided we wouldn't sit and watch. We couldn't live and wait. We had to live in hope, and hope meant we were going to fight, and we were going to fight hard.
There's 7,000 different rare diseases that affect 1 in 10 Americans, but over 350 million people worldwide. That makes rare disease the largest disease community on the planet. When you look at the caregivers that are involved, the moms, the dads, the grandparents, that now triples the impact. That's 1/3 of the US population. So at the end of the day, rare is not so rare. And maybe together we can share best practices and help these parents. And so together we created Global Genes and where it's at today. We help give patients the tools and resources to equip them to go out there and fight this fight.
Alone, we're small. Batten disease as a group is small, but when we join with other rare disease patients and conditions and diseases, we are huge and we have a voice.
Rare disease research is gaining ground, gaining popularity, but this never would have taken place, this never would have happened without the champions and the parents that have really risen and responded to that call of, I have to do something.
I wanted to be able to enjoy the present and enjoy them and provide them a quality of life, but I also wanted to be able to try and get progress with saving someone in the future from having to go through this. Even if I can't save my children's lives, if I can save someone else from going through what I went through, then that's progress.
The families that are dealing with rare diseases are they're amazing people. I've seen them do things that you would never think that a human being is capable of doing. And I guess you can understand it. I have 3 kids, and if I saw one of them going through this, I'd be moving mountains too.
Carl was on a quest, and that quest was to try and find a cure for children with Sanfilippo. And through that journey, we went up Mount Rainier, bringing awareness about Sanfilippo, bringing awareness of rare disease and how you develop therapies. And so we thought, what else could we do? So we decided to climb higher, and Carl found us another mountain to climb, and it was Pico de Orizaba, which is the tallest peak in Mexico and the tallest in the lower 48 contiguous United States. It's 18,500 feet. We thought this would be a great quest for us to continue the story.
I was on a run one night in my neighborhood, and all of a sudden, the idea popped into my head. That year in 2013, over about a 5-month period, I set out to learn to run blindfolded. I tracked down a good friend who also happened to live in my neighborhood, also happened to be a part-time cross-country and track coach, and I said to him, on the 5-year anniversary of Taylor's first 5K, I'm going to run the half marathon on that course blindfolded, but I need you to help me get to the finish line.
I am in the process of riding across the country and back, raising money and awareness for EB. I think biking in some way has saved my life. Biking's always been in my life, but 2 or 3 years after he passed away, that's when it slowly evolved and said, this is something I can have anger with, this is something I can cry, it's something I can do. And it just became my outlet to try to cope with the death of Drakey.
I had gotten to thinking that in the 10 years I had been at the school I was in, We had never done anything really to raise awareness of the disease that I had. I gathered some more information and I found out about Rare Disease Day and the Global Genes Foundation. We ended up making little pins that looked like denim ribbons that were handed out to all the kids in the school to raise awareness of rare diseases. And we ended up raising over $10,000. A lot of people don't see that it doesn't have to be something so elaborate. I'm a 13-year-old that raised $10,000 in her school just by making a speech and talking to the kids in the school, and everybody really can give back as long as, you're passionate about it.
We arrived in Mexico City, and the next day drove over to one of the Aztec pyramids. And this really gave us a sense of journey and history and where we had come to date. Gene therapy has just been making its biggest strides in the past few years, which helped us reflect on what we had done since 2013.
We're in a very good time to see the growth of this field to become actually a real medical therapy. And in fact, this year is the first approval of a biopharmaceutical drug based on gene therapy. That sets a path forward for others to follow.
Gene therapy today has reached a different level. The number of companies running programs, the number of clinical trials underway, it's really exploded in the past decade. However, for each of these gene therapies for these rare diseases, in almost every case, one can point to foundations that played a critical role in catalyzing the early research to make it possible.
I had to learn to navigate the world without the gift of sight. Something my sister had done as a 10-year-old. So much about that 5 months of training to be a blind runner paralleled with what we were facing as a family fighting a rare disease. Taking on that challenge personally gave me the tools I needed to get through the fight that was only going to get more difficult, more tragic, more painful as Taylor continued to get sicker and sicker. Running is something I do to raise awareness of Batten disease. It's something I do to honor my sister. But running saved my life too.
We arrived in the small town at the base of Pico de Orizaba, and it started hailing the size of nickels. And we thought to ourselves, what are we getting into? The weather started to clear a little bit, and you saw through the clouds, and you saw this peak way up there, this glacier-enshrouded peak from the mists of time that you thought, wow, we're gonna try and get up to the top of that. It's a lot steeper, and it's much taller than Mount Rainier. Just a few weeks prior, some people had run into some serious challenges and lost their lives at the top of this peak. We began our trek up into the reserve. We started to get into the tree line. Finally got up to the cabin where you spend some time before you begin your midnight ascent.
So let's talk about the psychological aspect tomorrow. I think it's super important not to psych yourself out too much. We've prepared as much as we could or as much as we did in the past, and nothing that we can do now can prepare us anymore. And just think about it bit by bit in small little pieces. I think that's the best way.
We started off at 1 o'clock in the morning and we climbed through some rock fields for about 4 or 5 hours until we reached the bottom of the glacier.
We got to the base of the glacier just as dawn was coming up. The birth of a new dawn, I think, reminded us all about why we were doing this. We were really struck by just the profound nature of who was on the climb with us. We had friends and families, we had members and families that had lost a child to Sanfilippo syndrome, and we had some that were still going through the journey.
After you get through the rock field and into the glaciers, when it gets technical, that's when you need to put on your crampons, you need to get your ice axes out, you need to get your rope teams together, because of the steepness of the mountain, one misstep and you could be tumbling down the mountain, and that could be fatal.
The amount of effort and willpower and focus that you have to maintain for a 6-hour period to get up that far at that elevation and at that inclination was a challenge. And so we all formed up into separate teams and started that climb up.
Every time I got tired, I just reminded myself why I'm doing this. I'm doing this for my children. I'm doing this for all these children with these rare diseases, to push forward, to give them a chance at life, to give them hope.
By the time you do get up on the top, you come up just over the lip of the volcano, and you think, I really hope I don't fall in or get blown in, because there's only a few feet difference between falling down the side of the mountain or falling into the volcano. At that point, I think when we reached the peak, we were the highest people in North America. The last climb group finished the ascent and came back down to the staging point just to get out of the 50-mile-an-hour winds. And we all looked at each other and gave a big group hug, and we pulled out the flag to remember why we were here. We carried more than 400 names on that flag. Again, it was a nice moment of remembering as part of this journey we weren't alone.
The thing that I kept thinking about was just one step at a time, and that's what I could control. We all are going to face challenges, and there are going to be times when it comes down to just left foot, breathe, left foot, right foot, breathe.
You kind of have this question, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. How do you tackle 7,000 rare diseases? One disease at a time.
Most long races, there's an aid station every 2 miles. Don't try to bite off that entire 13 miles at once. I had to learn to run a bunch of great little 2-mile races. If you can tackle big challenges in life as just a series of little sprints, and keep getting to the finish line of that sprint, keep having a good day, then have another good day, and then have another good day. Sometimes it may be you're winning the race. Other days, it may be survive and advance, and that's okay. If you string together enough survive and advance days, eventually you will get to that finish line.
One of the best parts of this trip was just remembering that we were really just continuing what so many other groups and foundations had started before us. Being able to take the torch up for a little while and say, you know what, we've got this. We will be the advocates. We will be the ones that, help remind everyone that, 1 in 10 people have a rare disease.
I was talking to Sharon and talking to Laura, kind of said, well, we've got these mice in the lab that have Batten disease, and we've treated them. And normally they die when they're about 8 months old, and we're getting ready to have the first mouse that celebrates its first birthday. So they drove up from Charlotte to Chapel Hill. They brought some pizza, and they brought some beer, and they brought some cake, and we had a birthday party for the mice.
What I would like to see for Batten disease is develop treatments that give children with Batten disease quality. For their families to be able to sit in a doctor's office getting that diagnosis and to not have to be told, I'm sorry, there's nothing we can do. Take your child home and love them and make happy memories because they're going to die. And I think today we are so well on our way on the path to viable treatments for many rare diseases, including Taylor's form of Batten disease.
One of the tough aspects when we're celebrating these achievements with the families, with Sharon and Laura, is in the back of our minds, there's always Taylor. Our purpose is most likely going to be so that the next family doesn't have to deal with this. And I think that's what's truly inspiring for me, is that you have families that they come into the deal knowing that it may not help their child, that most likely it won't help their child, and they still do it. Taylor was the whole reason why we did all this, but it's going to be her legacy, not her life.
So when we look out a couple of years from now, I think that that's going to accelerate. We'll see ways that kids are getting caught much earlier in the disease progression before it becomes a monster to these kids, before their symptoms really start to rob them of time and quality. And that is why there's hope.
Drakey was put here for a reason. Everybody has their idea why Drakey was put here to help people to do whatever he did. This would have never happened, obviously. I'd never been riding a bike across the country and back. I don't think I've ever found the need to biking without him passing away. It's given me the opportunity to try to work on myself and be a better person to my family, be a better person to my friends, and be a better person to myself. Sure, there's a little bit about Drakey, but it's not in the memory of my son. It's not about Drakey. It's not about me. It's about doing the right thing. It's about doing something because I can do it. You know, it's about doing it because you can. You can try. It's okay to fail. It's not okay not to try. As long as there's hope. That's the most important thing to me with any rare disease. You have to have hope. These families have to have hope.
You can live for a month without food and a week without water, but you can't live a day without hope.
You don't have to raise millions of dollars. You don't have to have a social media campaign that goes viral. You don't have to climb mountains or run marathons blind. You just have to be you. You have to look forward. And we have to look within ourselves and say, what can I do to make this better? Whether it's for me or for the person to come after me. I realized along the way that all of the tireless work and effort and energy we've put into Taylor's Tale is not going to save my sister's life. And we could have thrown in the towel, but we didn't. Anything that I face in life, I know that there is always something we can do to make it better, and there's always something we can do to make a difference.
Imagine the impact you could have if you take that leap of faith. If you choose to immerse yourself in the pursuit of your true purpose. To step into the role that you were created for, despite the darkness and despite the unknown. If you'd keep hoping, even when what you're hoping for has changed. Just keep going, because you are right at the edge of hope.
Right. Pulling myself together here. One of the things that really resonated with me was when they were talking about how when you're given a diagnosis, you're not given any roadmap. That's something that I'm sure a lot of us can relate to. So we're going to have some time for conversation and questions with Dan and Laura. We encourage everyone to submit questions through the Q&A box or comments to the chat. I'll get us kicked off here. Let's start with Laura and talk to us a little bit more about how do you train to run blind?
So first of all, thank you to the Pura Syndrome Foundation for having Dan and me today. It's really inspiring to be a part of this. The film still gives me chills too, so kudos to Dan. There isn't really a guidebook for learning to run blindfolded. I don't know how many people have done that. And I will say too that when you actually are sighted, there are inherent challenges in that we depend so much on our vision. We almost have to untrain ourselves to rely on our eyesight. I was lucky to have an incredible guide named Andrew. You saw him in the film leading me on that marathon or half marathon. But I'd say the first thing is, again, no rule book, but you really just have to have trust and have faith. You have to trust that your other senses will come through in the absence of your sight. So I learned really quickly to pay attention to things like the way the road felt through my shoes, understanding the dips and the rises in the road. So if we went up a little bit of an incline, you feel that a lot more when you can't see, and understanding how you have to immediately adjust your gait or the way that you're running so you don't go tumbling and fall. I think too, just understanding all of the cues that your guide is giving you. But more than anything else, it's having faith and trust. And I think that's certainly a lot of what we have to do as rare disease patients and families and caregivers is have faith in ourselves and in the process and in tomorrow. So running blind was an experience that in a lot of ways paralleled, what we face with rare disease.
Wow. You talking about like thinking about your balance and hills and stuff. I mean, it really shows how your perspective, when your senses are affected, how your perspective changes.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Dan, I have sort of a two-part question for you. One, can you talk about, the process of working with the rare disease community? Had you had any connection with the community before, and then where are you going from here?
Well, thank you again for having Laura and me for this. It was a real treat to be here. And to answer your question, yeah, so I really got started about 5 or 6 years ago when I photographed the wedding of a guy named Carl. I learned very little at the time other than he had 2 children with a rare disease. And I kind of tucked that away in the back of my mind. We worked together, and then we reconnected a few years later at a different event, and he told me he was training, and I said, "What are you training for?" And he said, "I'm training to climb Mount Rainier." Now I'm from New Jersey. I had never even heard of Mount Rainier, so I said, "Cool, that sounds great. Sign me up." And then I went home and I Googled Mount Rainier, and I pretty much pooed myself. It was it was like in the news, like climbers die on Mount Rainier. It was very scary. So I started training. 9 months later, we filmed. We did the climb on Mount Rainier, and we joined Carl and Tim and many of the characters from the film in that pursuit. It wound up evolving into a larger film called The Weight of a Mountain, which is sort of the precursor to the one that we just saw. That was my first ever documentary, and huge kudos to Tim and Michelle, who were both featured in the film, for trusting me to make it pretty much sight unseen. They said, "Yeah, this is like a gift to the rare disease community. Just go for it." And I realized as I dove in more that there was just a story I wanted to tell. And the incredible people involved in the rare disease community, such as everyone that's on this call, I think has been something I just hadn't seen in any other area or arena in life or business. So it was something I was drawn to, and I wanted to understand it more and communicate it in a way that mattered to people that may not have a direct reason to get involved. I mean, I've heard from parents that this is not something that you choose. It's something that it happens to you in life. You're born with a child with, rare disease, and then you become the expert. Then you get involved. And so I thought, what can we use as a tool to pull people in that may not have that, that experience, but can still do something. They can still change the way they interact in the world. And so we wound up going from that one, and then we felt there was another mountain to climb, which was Orizaba in Mexico, and that made this film. And to kind of fast forward through to today, Dr. Timothy Miller from that film, he wound up starting a new company called Forge Biologics in early last year, and started talking with me about some options for it and ideas. And I felt very drawn to participate in sort of the early phases of creating a brand and really accelerating the timelines for bringing medicines to families with rare genetic diseases. And I felt like I could do that better at a position in a biotech company alongside Tim, who I trust greatly and love dearly as a friend. And so I've now working full-time at Forge Biologics. So it's a really cool transition from full-time photography to film, and then this one little interaction with the rare disease family. My depth of interest just kind of grew and grew and grew until now it's my whole livelihood. That's what I think about when I wake up all the way to going to bed, is how we can serve this community better.
Great. Laura, can you talk to us a little bit more about Taylor's Tale and the work that your foundation does?
Sure. So Taylor's Tale was founded, feels like many years ago now. We're about a 14-year-old organization, which is hard to believe. But we started with a fairly narrow focus of wanting to fund research. That was really our primary goal when Taylor's Tale was created. That evolved and took on its own kind of look over the years. We did a lot with enzyme replacement therapy, some small molecule drugs, but we really landed in a 2012, 2013 timeframe on gene therapy. Gene therapy was, in a really exciting place in its history and its momentum. And we met Steve Gray, who you met in the film, and we're really excited about not only his acumen as a scientist, but also his, personal belief in the mission, and really, the fact that he feels like this is his calling. And when he goes into the lab, he's not just doing science experiments; he's trying to save the lives of real people, which makes such a difference if you understand the why behind what you do. Steve certainly does. So we worked with Steve for years, really, moving forward the basic research, and then getting it to a point where it would be picked up. So I am excited that very soon, it has not been announced, but they will begin recruiting patients for a clinical trial for the treatment that we actually spearheaded and helped fund. So, my sister is gone, but, it's such an important and powerful part of her legacy that children like her will get treated with what I think is going to be an effective treatment in real life. And another part of what we do is advocacy. So we feel like you can create the treatments in the lab, but we have to be able to get them to patients. And there's this so-called valley of death, particularly in the rare disease space, where it's very hard from a policy perspective to move even a really effective treatments into a place where they're available on the market. It's hard when the numbers are small. Certainly, rare disease communities know that all too well. So we're active in that scene as well. We actually were the ones who were responsible for, with some help from policymakers, creating their nation's first rare disease advisory council in our home state of North Carolina. And then the most recent thing that we have done is we brought together clinical and scientific experts from around the world to a meeting in our home state of North Carolina. And what came out of that meeting was creating clinical care guidelines for CLN1 disease, the form of Batten that Taylor had. Again, if you're a rare disease family, often there's not a blueprint
for your experience and your journey, but also the care. You know, how is your pediatrician supposed to provide regular care? You know, what about your specialists? They may be amazing doctors, but they don't necessarily see these conditions every day in their clinic. So these guidelines are really a blueprint for that. You to understand, you know, best practice, what's worked well for these patients in the past. And beyond that, awareness. I mean, awareness is kind of the umbrella that goes over it all, because you have to tell your stories. You have to make more people aware of these diseases. Because knowledge is power, numbers are power, and the more that we can do to share stories, the closer we're going to get to our ultimate goal of eradicating these diseases. So that's a long answer to your question, Eva, but we are still actively doing all of those things today. We are certainly a grassroots volunteer-run organization, but I like to make sure that, you know, we are always small but mighty, trying to make a difference and move mountains, even with maybe smaller resources than a big organization.
I'm glad that you brought up the power in numbers, and that's something that's been on my mind a lot, about thinking about how I can better be an advocate for Pura. And you know, how much of that is focused specific of your work is specifically focused on Batten disease and through your organization, and are you partnering with other organizations in the rare disease community to have a larger voice on certain issues? You know, and I know that you have been affiliated with Global Genes. You know, how does these other organizations fit in, and where should we be looking for like partnerships and to kind of band together for some of the bigger issues of the community?
Yeah. So there are a lot of different outlets for that. That's a great question, Eva. You know, certainly organizations that probably everybody knows, like Global Genes, we're part of their Rare Alliance, and have been for some time, I think, since it was started. Other groups who are focusing on your specific disease or disease group, but also looking at the state level. A lot of things that affect rare disease communities happen at the state level from a policy perspective. One of those is newborn screening. So that's been a big piece for us. So getting to know your state lawmakers, making sure that your voice is heard, telling your story as much as you can, has been really important for us. And of course, she's not on the call today, but my mom and co-founder, Sharon King, has really been the driving force in that. I don't want to take too much of the credit. So that's really important as well. But just starting to make those connections, and you will find that over time, as you make those connections, they create this web, and a lot of really great things can happen as a result of that.
That's great. All right, we want to give anybody one last opportunity to submit questions. Is there anything behind the scenes that you guys want to share, that, or anything about the making that you want to share with everyone that we might not have seen from?
Yeah, sure. There's a whole lot of interesting anecdotes that came about through the behind the scenes. I'll focus on just a couple, but I think the funniest one is probably the intro scene. There was a lot of work that that went into making some of those choices, but it almost didn't happen for a lot of reasons. We arrived, or we were about to depart, flying into Colorado. It was filmed in this remote lake in Colorado. And we had, my producer, Paul, was scheduled to be there. And the night before we flew out, he texted me a picture of himself in the hospital saying, I can't make it, something's off. I don't know what's going on. Doctors are doing all this crazy stuff. So he wound up being fine, but he was in the hospital for 3 days. So I went out there alone with no help, no second camera operator. And what we didn't realize was that this lake, it was a glacial lake. So there's literally a glacier right above it melting to create the lake. So when we filmed her diving in that opening scene, we had to do that 3 times to get a couple different aerial angles and underwater shots. And as soon as we stepped in the water, it's like 35 degrees. I mean, it's so cold. I bought a wetsuit thinking that's what one does to stay dry and warm. And I was wrong. You need a dry suit. So I was misguided on that front, and it was unbelievably cold. Trying to film underwater, it was a crapshoot. But we also rented an inflatable, purchased an inflatable kayak to carry out with us, and we had to fly with it. So my Amazon list was very, very confused for a while. It was like, based on your interest in kayaks and a leaf blower, which I used to create the shawl flying away. And the purple was a nod to the San Filippo community's colors and the MPS diseases. So it was quite a thing. Another little detail that we intentionally made it difficult to notice was that Laura was actually pregnant during the scene.
Stole it from me.
Yeah, yeah. What were you, like 7 months pregnant?
Months.
I mean, it was like right at the limit of being able to do it. But all the shots are like, I was hanging out the back of a car, trying to get like a nice smooth shot of her running. We were up ultra early, like 3 a.m. or something, to film it. And we used like bushes to like cut off, from like, from like the waist
Hair
up.
down.
Yeah, right. It was like head up. It was.
Yeah, the interview portion was much easier to, some people would think, oh, the interview, you have to get the words right, but that was far easier than the logistics of filming somebody running when they're 7.5 months pregnant. With a blindfold.
Yes.
Yeah, just throw that in.
Let's up the ante a little.
Well, we really appreciate your time and sharing this film and your work with the Pura community. And we will be posting this replay for those that couldn't make it today on our website. Is there any way that, if people have any questions afterwards, what's the best way to find out about your work and Taylor's Tale? How can people find you?
Sure. So I'll go first. Taylor's Tale, you can go to taylorstale.org and to see, more about the work that we do. Certainly follow us on social media. I will say that I do a better job these days with a full-time job and a 2-year-old who is, unbeknownst to him, part of At the Edge of Hope. It's good to stay up to date with us on social media. I do a better job there on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. And then grab a copy of my book. It's a love letter to my little sister. It's super personal, but it's also the story of so many people who face a rare disease diagnosis. And hope it's inspiring to those who understand it well as well as those who don't or haven't been through it.
Yeah, and for anyone that's interested in watching the film or sharing it in some way, or sharing the trailer or seeing some of the additional behind the scenes images, it's all public on attheedgeofhope.com. We've made the full film available right there on the front page, as well as the first film is available on its respective website. It's called theweightofAmountain.com.
Eva, I noticed that we do have one Q&A question that was submitted.
I didn't see it here. I see it now. You have done heroic things for your rare disease person, and this is so inspiring. Most of us cannot do such amazing feats, but want to do something for our rare disease kids. What suggestions can you give us?
And I saw that, and that is a great question. And I will go back to Dan's film for a minute. If you remember, Gabby was the patient who was 13 at the time that she, the story in the film. And I think actually one of the most powerful statements in that entire film came from the kid who said, you don't have to raise millions of dollars. I'm paraphrasing her, but you don't have to scale mountains. You don't have to run races blind. She just got in front of her classmates in the gym at school and told her story and raised $10,000. And I think that's the most important thing to take away from this film, even though so much of it is based on these, what may seem to be really difficult physical feats, is that all of us have something to give and give back. And sometimes it's about thinking small, and even those seemingly small things can move mountains at the end of the day. So I love that particular story, and hope that's an encouragement to anybody who thinks that they can't make a difference, because we all can.
I think that's a great way to close. And once again, thank you so much for your time and sharing your stories with our peer community.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having us.
Yes, thank you so much.